The calendar notification popped up on my screen at 10:23 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in late October. Subject line, Career Development Conversation. Location, Executive Conference Room. Attendees, Michelle Sterling, CEO. Catherine Williams, HR Director. Me. I stared at that notification for about 45 seconds before the meaning hit me like cold water. In my 18 years working at Pinnacle Pharmaceuticals, I'd watched this exact sequence play out maybe 8 times. The vague meeting title, the closed-door location, the HR presence. It was the corporate equivalent of reading your own obituary. My name is Charles Rodriguez. Most people call me Charlie. I'm 47 years old, and for nearly 2 decades I've been the guy nobody thinks about until everything falls apart. My official title is Senior Regulatory Compliance Officer, which is the kind of job that makes people's eyes glaze over at barbecues. I verify that our pharmaceutical shipments meet federal safety standards under 21 CFR Part 211. I track temperature logs for Schedule 2, controlled substances per DEA requirements. I make sure our warehouse certifications stay current with FDA Good Distribution Practice guidelines. I ensure the documentation we submit to government agencies actually reflects reality, not some fantasy version management prefers. It's not glamorous work, no corner office, no company car, but it's also the kind of work that keeps a pharmaceutical distributor from losing their DEA license when someone with a badge shows up asking uncomfortable questions about our controlled substance inventory records. See, I learned a thing or two about accountability during my 8 years in the Navy. Chain of command, following protocols. Understanding that when you sign your name to something, your word is your bond. These aren't just nice ideas, they're the difference between mission success and mission failure. Between people going home safe or not going home at all. On the USS Hampton, a Los Angeles-class submarine, there was no room for good enough or close enough. When you're 400 feet underwater with 150 souls depending on your systems working exactly as designed, precision isn't optional. Every gauge reading matters. Every maintenance log entry matters. Every safety protocol exists because someone before you paid the price for cutting corners. That mindset set doesn't just disappear when you trade Navy blues for business casual. When I started at Pinnacle fresh out of service in 2006, I approached pharmaceutical compliance the same way I'd approached sonar maintenance, with absolute precision and zero tolerance for shortcuts. For 17 years, that approach worked. We passed every audit. Our DEA renewals sailed through. Our FDA inspections came back clean. The company built a reputation for regulatory excellence that helped us land major distribution contracts with hospital systems across the Southeast. Then Michelle Sterling arrived. I didn't panic when I saw that meeting invite. Panic happens when something catches you by surprise. This had been building for months, each week adding another brick to a wall I could see coming but couldn't stop. So I took a sip of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, minimized the calendar notification, and went back to finishing a temperature compliance audit that nobody had requested. After 18 years, muscle memory doesn't care if the people upstairs have decided you're disposable. The work continues because that's what professionals do. The trouble started 6 months earlier when Michelle Sterling arrived as our new CEO. The board brought her in from McKinley Consulting with instructions to modernize operations and increase efficiency. She was 35, fresh MBA from Wharton, and her first company-wide meeting was full of phrases like disrupting outdated workflows and empowering teams to move at market speed. I've got nothing against young leadership. Hell, some of my best commanding officers were younger than me. But there's a difference between confidence and arrogance, between innovation and recklessness. Within her first month, Michelle restructured the entire operations department, bringing in new managers from outside the pharmaceutical industry. People who understood logistics but didn't understand the regulatory environment that governed every aspect of what we did. Nicholas Thompson came from Amazon Fulfillment. Jennifer Parker had a background in automotive supply chain. Good people, probably, but they didn't understand that pharmaceutical distribution isn't like shipping books or car parts. When you're handling Schedule II narcotics, you can't just optimize for speed and efficiency. Every shipment has to be tracked from manufacture to pharmacy with complete chain of custody documentation. Every temperature excursion during transport has to be investigated and documented. Every employee handling controlled substances needs current training certifications. These aren't bureaucratic annoyances. They're federal requirements with criminal penalties for violations. The first warning sign came in July, when we were preparing for a routine DEA audit of our controlled substance storage. Part of the prep involved verifying that our temperature monitoring logs were complete and accurate. We store certain medications like insulin and biologics that require specific temperature ranges between 36 and 46 degrees Fahrenheit. If those ranges get violated for more than 30 minutes, the medications can become unsafe or lose effectiveness. Federal regulations under 21 CFR 205.50 require immediate investigation and documentation of any temperature excursions. I found 17 instances over the previous quarter where temperature alarms had been triggered but not properly documented in our logs. Each alarm indicated a potential excursion outside the safe range. Protocol requires immediate investigation within 2 hours, documentation of findings, and sometimes quarantine of affected inventory pending stability testing. When I brought this to Nicholas Thompson, the new operations manager, he told me it was a non-issue. Said the alarms were hypersensitive, and the actual temperature variations were minimal, probably just door openings or brief power fluctuations. "Look, Charlie," he said, leaning back in his ergonomic chair. "I get that you Navy guys like everything documented down to the last detail. But we're trying to run a business here. These temperature spikes are tiny blips that don't affect product quality." I sent him an email that same afternoon explaining that regardless of whether the variations seemed minimal, federal regulations under 21 CFR 205.50 require documentation of every alarm event and verification that no compromised product entered distribution. I copied my direct supervisor, Jennifer Parker, who reported to Michelle, and attached the relevant FDA guidance documents. Nick replied within an hour that the warehouse team would be more diligent about documentation. Going forward, Jen replied with, "Thanks for flagging this, Charlie. Let's keep momentum moving." Keep momentum moving became the standard response to everything I flagged. Don't slow down the process. Trust the team's judgment. Move fast and break things. Except in pharmaceuticals, breaking things can literally kill people. The training certification issue came in August, and it was worse than the temperature logs. Our quarterly DEA report required verification that all warehouse personnel handling controlled substances had completed mandatory training modules per 21 CFR 1301.92. This isn't optional training. It's federal law. Every employee who touches Schedule II narcotics needs documented training on proper handling, security protocols, and inventory tracking procedures. I pulled the completion records from our learning management system and found that 12 employees had incomplete training due to a software glitch that locked them out of the final assessment. The system showed them at 85% completion, but DEA requirements are binary. You either have complete, current training or you don't. There's no close enough when you're handling controlled substances worth thousands per bottle on the street. I ran the numbers. These 12 employees had collectively handled over $2.3 million worth of controlled substances during the quarter while technically unqualified under federal regulations. If the DEA discovered this during an inspection, we'd be looking at immediate license suspension and potential criminal charges. I couldn't certify that training was complete when I knew it wasn't. So I sent an email to Jen explaining the situation and requesting a deadline extension while we got everyone through the final modules. I estimated it would take 3 business days to resolve. Her response was classic corporate doublespeak. "Charlie, appreciate the thoroughness, but we're under pressure to maintain our compliance metrics. Please go ahead and mark training as complete. We'll cycle the affected employees through a refresher course next quarter. This is a timing issue, not a substantive gap." I replied that marking incomplete training as complete would constitute falsification of federal records under 18 U.S.C. 1341. Said I couldn't sign off on it. Mentioned that DEA inspectors aren't known for their sense of humor about training shortcuts. That didn't go over well. Jen called me into her office the next day and told me I was developing a reputation for being inflexible. She said Michelle was trying to build a high-performance culture, and I needed to be more of a team player. She used the word technically a lot. As in, technically you're correct, but we need to be pragmatic here. As in, technically the training is incomplete, but these are experienced employees. As in, technically we should follow every regulation to the letter, but that's not how modern businesses operate. I tried explaining that technically correct is the only kind of correct that matters when federal agents are reviewing your files, that the DEA doesn't care about your company culture or performance metrics, that modern business approaches don't override federal drug laws. She wasn't interested in my explanation. I refused to sign the training certification, so Jen signed it herself. She had signatory authority as the compliance supervisor. The report went to the DEA with her signature instead of mine, certifying that all employees had completed required training when I had documented proof that 12 of them hadn't. That's when I knew the fix was in. They weren't just cutting corners, they were systematically bypassing federal requirements and putting my signature on the lies. When I wouldn't play along, they'd find someone who would. But by the 3rd quarter, they'd figured out a more sophisticated workaround. Instead of asking me to certify things I knew were false, they started changing the information before it reached me. I'd get a compliance packet that looked complete on paper. All the boxes checked, all the dates filled in, all the documentation seemingly in order. I'd review what was presented, find it adequate, and sign off. Then later, I'd discover that the underlying documentation didn't support what had been certified. The security audit referenced in our Q3 DEA filing is a perfect example. The report states that a comprehensive physical security audit of our controlled substance storage was completed on August 19th per 21 CFR 1301.72 requirements. It lists my name as the reviewing officer and includes my digital signature certifying compliance with security standards. Problem is, no comprehensive audit was completed. Timothy Hayes, our security manager, told me directly that he'd been instructed to submit a preliminary security checklist as if it were a completed audit because the deadline was approaching and leadership didn't want to report incomplete status. Tim's a good guy. Former Marine, served 2 tours in Afghanistan before getting into corporate security. He understood what he was being asked to do wasn't right, but he also understood what happens to people who push back too hard in Michelle's new high-performance culture. "Charlie, they're asking me to sign off on a security assessment that's maybe 40% complete," he told me during our monthly coordination meeting. "I've got 3 sections of the warehouse I haven't even inspected yet, and my background checks on 2 new hires are still pending. But Thompson says the report needs to go out Friday, or we miss the DEA deadline." I sent another email to Jen, said I couldn't certify a security audit that hadn't been completed. requested that we either extend the deadline or report the audit as in progress, which is what honest companies do when they need more time. Jen called me in for another career development conversation. This time, Michelle was there too. "Charlie," Michelle said, settling into her chair with the practiced ease of someone who'd fired people before. "I'm hearing that you're struggling with our new operational tempo." "I'm not struggling with operational tempo," I replied. "I'm struggling with being asked to certify false information to federal agencies." Michelle's expression shifted slightly. The corporate smile flickered for just a moment. "That's a serious accusation, Charlie. It's not an accusation, it's documentation." I pulled out my laptop and opened a folder labeled Compliance Issues Q3 2024. I have email threads showing repeated requests to certify incomplete training as complete. I have temperature monitoring gaps that weren't investigated per federal requirements. I have security audits that exist only on paper. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Michelle leaned forward. "Charlie, I think you're misunderstanding the big picture here," Michelle said. "We're a distribution company, not a research lab. We don't need to treat every minor procedural gap like it's a federal case. When we're handling Schedule II controlled substances, every procedural gap is potentially a federal case," I said. "These aren't suggestions. They're laws with criminal penalties." Michelle's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Look, I brought you in here to discuss your future with this company. Your resistance to process improvements is becoming a problem. We need team players who can adapt to a fast-moving environment, not people who want to debate every decision." "I'm not debating decisions," I said. "I'm refusing to commit federal crimes." The room went dead quiet. I'd crossed a line, and we all knew it. Jennifer cleared her throat. "Charlie, maybe we should schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss specific concerns." "No," Michelle said firmly. "I think we need to address this right now. Charlie, if you can't function in our current operational environment, maybe this isn't the right role for you." That's when I knew I was being set up for termination. In the Navy, we had a saying, "Document everything, trust nothing." So I'd been keeping detailed records of every warning I sent, every concern I raised, every response I received. Email threads, audit notes, internal memos, screenshots of incomplete training records. All of it organized by date and incident type. All of it backed up to my personal cloud storage. I had documented proof of the temperature alarm incidents that weren't investigated per 21 CFR 205 FIFC requirements. I had the training falsifications showing 12 unqualified employees handling controlled substances. I had Tim's original security checklist showing the audit was incomplete when management certified it as finished. I had the batch recall incident from September that should have been reported to the FDA under 21 CFR 207.59, but wasn't because it would have triggered an investigation. That last one was the worst violation. A shipment of diabetes medication had been exposed to temperatures above 86 degrees for 4 hours during transport. The manufacturer's stability data showed that exposure compromised the medication's effectiveness. FDA regulations required immediate notification and recall of potentially affected batches. Instead, management decided to monitor the situation and gather more data while continuing to distribute the medication. Their reasoning was that a recall would damage relationships with key customers and cost approximately $400,000 in destroyed inventory. I'd sent 3 separate emails flagging this as a mandatory reporting situation under federal adverse event guidelines. Jennifer had responded that they were consulting with legal and would proceed cautiously to avoid unnecessary alarm. 6 weeks later, no report had been filed. The compromised medication was still in the distribution pipeline. If patients were harmed by ineffective diabetes medication, people could literally die. That night, I went home to my apartment and sat at my kitchen table with a beer and my laptop. I opened my compliance documentation folder and started organizing everything chronologically. If I was going to be fired for refusing to falsify federal records, I wanted a complete paper trail showing exactly what I'd tried to prevent. At 3:47 p.m. the next Wednesday, I saved my final document, backed it up, and stood from my desk. I'd already packed the photos from my office that morning, not because I'm psychic, but because I understand patterns. When you've been around long enough, you learn to read the weather before the storm arrives. The walk from my desk to the executive conference room took 90 seconds, long enough to notice that the usual office chatter had dropped to whispers, long enough to see colleagues suddenly become very interested in their computer screens as I passed, long enough to feel the weight of being the person everyone knows is about to become a cautionary tale. I was halfway down the corridor when I heard it. A sound so routine that most people wouldn't register it. The mechanical whir of the security badge printer at the front reception desk. It cycled once, paused, then cycled twice more in rapid succession. 3 visitors arriving simultaneously, unscheduled. In my 18 years at Pinnacle, unannounced visitors always meant one of 2 things: major customers with urgent problems or government inspectors conducting surprise audits. Given that it was 3:50 p.m. on a Wednesday, customers seemed unlikely. I slowed my pace and glanced toward the glass partition separating the main hallway from the lobby. 3 people in dark suits stood at the security desk. 2 men, 1 woman. The woman wore a lanyard with a federal seal I recognized immediately. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General. One of the men carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain several pounds of documentation. The other had a tablet and was already taking notes. They weren't smiling. They weren't asking Lisa, our receptionist, for directions to the bathroom. They were showing credentials and moving past the security checkpoint with the kind of purposeful stride that doesn't wait for permission. Lisa picked up her phone with shaking hands. Her voice carried just far enough for me to hear. "There are federal inspectors here. They're asking for the regulatory compliance officer. They say it's urgent. They're not scheduled." My pulse kicked up, not with fear, but with something sharper. Recognition. Vindication, maybe. I changed direction. Instead of heading toward the executive conference room where Michelle was preparing to fire me, I turned toward the main lobby. The woman with the OIG lanyard saw me approach. She was in her mid-40s with steel-gray hair pulled back severely and the kind of eyes that had seen every excuse and believed none of them. "Charles Rodriguez?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." She extended a hand. "Special Agent Rachel Cooper, Office of Inspector General. These are investigators Daniel Murphy and Patrick Sullivan. We're here to conduct an unscheduled compliance inspection related to your company's quarterly DEA and FDA filings." My stomach dropped and soared simultaneously. "Understood. What do you need from me?" "Everything," she said. "We need your documentation, your correspondence, your audit trails, and your honest assessment of whether the reports your company submitted to federal agencies over the past 6 months are accurate." Behind me, I heard rapid footsteps. Kate Williams, the HR director, appeared at the edge of the lobby, face flushed. "Excuse me, can I help you?" "We weren't notified of any inspection today." Agent Cooper turned to her with an expression that could freeze gasoline. "Federal inspections under Title 21 don't require advance notification. We're here under statutory authority to examine compliance records. Your cooperation is mandatory, not optional." Kate's mouth opened and closed. "I need to notify our CEO." "You do that," Cooper said. "In the meantime, we'll be speaking with Mr. Rodriguez. I assume there's a private space available?" "Conference room 3, I said. "Down this hall, second door on the left." Cooper nodded. "Lead the way." Conference room 3 was small, windowless, equipped with a table that could seat 6 people uncomfortably. Cooper took the head of the table. The 2 investigators sat on either side. I sat across from them. Cooper opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Mr. Rodriguez, let me be direct. 3 weeks ago, your company filed its quarterly compliance report with the DEA regarding controlled substance handling and storage. That report included certifications for temperature monitoring, security protocols, and staff training completion." She slid a document across the table. "Our Q3 DEA filing. My name was on the certification line at the bottom. Did you personally verify every item in this report before you signed it?" she asked. I looked at the document, at the neat checkboxes marking everything complete, at the date stamps that looked perfect on paper. Then I looked up at Agent Cooper. "No," I said. "I did not." For the next hour, I walked them through everything. The temperature alarms that went undocumented, the training that was falsified, the security audit that existed only on paper, the diabetes medication recall that was never reported to the FDA. For each violation, I pulled up the documentation on my laptop, the email where I'd raised the concern, the response I'd received, the proof that my version of events was accurate. "Mr. Rodriguez," Cooper said when I finished, "what you've shown us constitutes evidence of multiple federal violations. If this documentation is accurate, your company is facing significant legal and financial consequences. I understand. I also want to be clear about your status. You are not a target of this investigation. Based on what you've shown us, you attempted to prevent these violations and were overruled by management. What about my termination? I was scheduled to be fired in about 10 minutes. Cooper's expression hardened. "If your employer attempts to terminate you while we're conducting this investigation, that becomes retaliation and obstruction. Both are federal offenses." There was a sharp knock on the conference room door. Through the small window, I saw Michelle Sterling standing in the hallway, arms crossed, jaw set. Cooper opened the door. "I'm Michelle Sterling, CEO of Pinnacle Pharmaceuticals," Michelle said. "I'd like to know why federal agents are in my building conducting interviews without notifying executive leadership." "We don't require permission to conduct compliance investigations," Cooper said. "We're operating under statutory authority. Your cooperation is mandatory. I have a meeting scheduled for 4:00 p.m., Michelle said. "Cancel it," Cooper said. Then she closed the door. The investigation took 8 months. 8 months of federal agents crawling through every filing we'd submitted, every process we'd certified, every claim we'd made. My documentation became the roadmap for their investigation, the proof that the violations weren't accidents or oversights, but deliberate decisions made by people who should have known better. The Department of Justice filed criminal charges against 3 executives. Michelle Sterling was indicted on conspiracy to defraud the United States, making false statements to federal agencies, and obstruction of justice. Jennifer Parker and Nicholas Thompson faced similar charges. If convicted, they each faced up to 15 years in federal prison. Pinnacle Pharmaceuticals paid $850,000 in fines, plus enhanced monitoring requirements for the next 5 years. The company survived, but barely. We lost 2 major distribution contracts during the investigation. Our insurance premiums tripled. The board brought in a new interim CEO, Amanda Brooks, who'd spent 30 years in pharmaceutical compliance and had 0 patience for corner cutting. I was promoted to Director of Regulatory Affairs with full authority over all compliance operations, a 40% salary increase, and an office with actual walls instead of cubicle partitions. I hired a team of 6 people, all with strong compliance backgrounds and 0 interest in playing fast and loose with federal regulations. 6 months after the investigation concluded, I was invited to testify before a House subcommittee on pharmaceutical safety. 9 months later, I was named Compliance Officer of the Year by the National Association of Pharmaceutical Compliance Professionals. The award came with speaking opportunities at conferences and business schools about corporate accountability. I still have that calendar notification saved on my phone, the one for my 4:00 p.m. termination meeting that never happened. Sometimes I look at it to remind myself that doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing, but it's always worth it. Because here's what I learned during those 8 months of investigation, indictments, and industry recognition. When you stand up for what's right, you might stand alone for a while. But eventually, the truth has a way of finding allies. And when it does, the people who bet against integrity always lose in the end. In business, as in the military, mission success depends on everyone doing their job with precision and honesty. Because when the stakes are real, there's no substitute for getting it right the first time.